Let's have a look, Chief.
Willard and the members of the PBR crew find the air cavalry, their escorts to the mouth of the Nung River, 30 kilometers before their designated meeting area, cleaning up after a battle. This is the first epic scene we see in the movie, with hundreds of extras, tons of fire and smoke, as well as large military land vehicles and several helicopters flying overhead. This scene will not only introduce us to one of Apocalypse Now's most memorable characters in Willard's first major obstacle to his quest, Colonel Kilgore, but it will also introduce us to the bizarre nature of the war in this story. So let's take a look at how this scene was made and the evolution of the Colonel Kilgore character.
Terminate. With extreme prejudice. Are you an assassin? A soldier?
As you can imagine, this scene was incredibly complex to coordinate with so much going on, but the scene was further complicated by the many different languages present. Coppola and most of the crew spoke English. Cinematographer Vittorio Storaro and his crew spoke Italian. There were Vietnamese extras who spoke Vietnamese. There were Filipino extras who spoke Tagalog, and some even spoke French. Every time I watch this scene, I'm blown away by all the little details and strange things going on, beginning with this large, menacing vehicle with painted-on eyes and teeth that climbs out of the water and seemingly begins to eat a modest Vietnamese house. When Coppola builds a scene like this, he writes out a series of vignettes on index cards. He did this with The Godfather as well. Part of his planning for The Godfather was to paste the pages of the novel into a notebook with wide margins surrounding each page for his notes. In the margins, he would, among other things, write out various little details to be included in the scenes to make them more memorable. For the wedding scene, there would be details like the little girl dancing on Tessio's feet.
People must feel that they're seeing the real thing with hundreds and hundreds of interesting specifics like the children sliding around the sandwich man, throwing the sandwich. Hey Bino, 2 gabagool and 1 prosciutto.
We will see many of these kinds of memorable details and vignettes in this scene and the upcoming Valkyrie sequence. Coppola said that many of these little moments came from talking to veterans of the war. Coppola collected about 30 vignettes, narrowed them down, and then just tried to do it shot by shot. The first vignette Willard encounters after leaving the boat is a film crew with a director urging the soldiers not to look at the camera.
Don't look at the camera, just go by like you're fighting! Like you're fighting! Don't look at the camera! It's for television!
As you can probably already tell, the director of the film crew is Coppola himself. Cinematographer Vittorio Storaro is manning the camera, and production designer Dean Tavoularis is holding the microphone. This cameo was unplanned. The actors playing the film crew weren't able to get to the set in time because of travel and communication issues, and Coppola, Storaro, and Tavoularis subbed in. Watching this, I can't help but remember George Lucas's idea to film Apocalypse Now with a similar 16mm film crew. In some new behind-the-scenes footage for the Final Cut Blu-ray, you can see Coppola and Storaro in their costumes while the camera is being reset. Even though this is just a brief vignette, there's actually a lot being said here. The Vietnam War was the first televised war, and had a huge impact on how the war was perceived by the American public, and President Lyndon Johnson actually believed that televising the war caused the United States to lose. Coppola says,
Just go by like you're fighting! Like you're fighting!
This was a real practice by journalists in the field. Combat footage, or what appeared like combat footage, was what the networks wanted. I found a lot of really interesting information on the impact television had on the war, and how the difficulties in producing media in a war zone shape perception and potentially the outcome of the war. You can read about it in this episode's companion PDF for $1. This scene is also where we get our first real look at the wide variety of costumes we will see in the movie. As well as being the production designer, Dean Tavoularis also designed the costumes. All of the costumes had to be absolutely authentic, and Tavoularis actually fired some local workers because they blended polyester and cotton for the Vietnamese soldier uniforms instead of the pure cotton that the real ones were made out of. It was very difficult to keep clean because of the wet, muddy landscape and helicopters blowing dirt everywhere. That said, Coppola noted that Vittorio Storaro was always looking like a prince, often dressed in pristine white, and even when he fell in the mud, he would get up and not be dirty. In an interview with American Cinematographer, Storaro said that everywhere Americans go, they make a great show of things. We see this with the Air Cav, but you could say the same for the production itself. The production would descend on the locations like an invading army. In a separate interview, Storaro describes a typical day on the production. He said, "At around 7 a.m., my driver came to pick me up, then the camera operator, Enrico Umatelli. Then we headed for Manila Airport. where we boarded Francis's private airplane with Francis, Dean Tavlaris, Eddie Flowers, the special effects guy, and Gray Fredrickson. No more than 6 or 7 people could be loaded on that plane. We had a 20-minute flight over the mountains, landing on a small strip in Baylor. 2 small helicopters were waiting for us and took us to the set, where we usually arrived at 8 sharp on the ground. And beside the ocean, we'd see the crew approaching from the little village of Baylor. Storaro's cinematography in this scene is incredible, not to mention the production design. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around a scene like this with so much going on and it's all done for real, without any computer animation available. It feels like painting with reality, to think of so many helicopters, burning buildings, and extras carrying out their own stories in the background. Look at all these people acting out a specific scene, and they'll only be seen in the background for a fleeting moment.
Any moment we were doing any single shot, even simple one, sometimes it's just a close-up. Behind that close-up, we maybe should put some color smoke. We maybe should put some napalm explosion. We may be supposed to put some helicopter. So any shot, in any simple sequence, it became a major issue.
And it wasn't just the background. In this behind-the-scenes footage, we can see a soldier trying to convince a kid to come down from the mast of a small boat. In the final shot, we just barely get a glimpse of this little story in the foreground as the camera passes by. However, with all of the different elements in the scene, it was very difficult to get the continuity right. Coppola employed his own technique when it came to continuity, as Eleanor Coppola wrote in her diary on November 14, 1976. Today, Francis was talking about how he doesn't ever match down in a scene. If he has a master shot with something he changes in the close-up, he never tries to make the good film conform to the less good. He stops and makes it all conform to the piece that evolved to be better, or he tries to get around it in the editing. All that matters is what's on the screen. Nobody cares about what you cut away and whether it matched or not. Willard asks for the commanding officer, Colonel Kilgore, who happens to be in a black Huey helicopter descending through the smoke with "Death from Above" written across the front. Notice the surfboards attached to the sides. Kilgore was apparently based on someone screenwriter John Milius actually knew. You might think that the name Kilgore is a little over the top, but wait till you hear the name Milius originally chose for the character in his early draft, Colonel William Carnage. Milius described Carnage as tough-looking, well-tanned, with a black mustache. In Coppola's June 29, 1976 draft of the script, he had changed Colonel Corman to General Corman, added the TV film crew, and changed Colonel Carnage to Colonel Kilgore. Coppola kept Milius's great opening line for Kilgore.
Lieutenant, bomb that tree line back about 100 yards! Give us some room to breathe! Yes, sir!
This was cut from the original theatrical release, but it was later put back in for the Redux version. In the original theatrical release, Willard finds Kilgore already on the ground. Also, in Milius's draft, Carnage tells Willard that he was expecting him. Coppola wanted this changed, writing in the margins of Milius's script, quote, "I like the idea that no one is easily accepted. There must always be the stink of conspiracy in the air." In the final film, we get this exchange.
"I understand the Trang has briefed you on the requirements of my mission."
What mission? I haven't heard from the Trang.
Kilgore tells Willard he'll do what he can and to stay out of his way. Colonel Kilgore was played by the great Robert Duvall. Duvall had worked with Coppola many times, acting in The Rain People, The Godfather Parts 1 and 2, The Conversation, and he played the lead role in George Lucas's THX 1138, which you'll remember nearly destroyed Coppola's American Zoetrope studio and led Coppola to The Godfather and the success that would bring him to take on Apocalypse Now.
There was somebody else slated to play it, and I said, "Look, Francis, I'll ask you one time. I would love to play that guy. I know he's written as a much bigger guy than I am, but..." And then he came to me, and and it was. I really liked playing it a lot.
Duvall signed on to play Kilgore for $65,000 and 1.5% of the net profits. According to Duvall, he flew to the Philippines and shot for 6 weeks. I believe this was for the Valkyrie sequence that directly follows this one, but as you'll remember, they had been shooting with Harvey Keitel, and when Keitel was fired from the production, they needed to reshoot some stuff with Martin Sheen. It was 6 months later that Duvall came back to the Philippines and reshot some of the Valkyrie stuff with Sheen, and shot this scene. So between filming much of the Valkyrie sequence and filming the earlier scene in which we meet Kilgore, the production had shot all of the Kurt scenes with Marlon Brando. Duvall said that during the 6 months between shooting the Valkyrie sequence and this scene, He spoke with a lot of the air cavalry people and heard about a bunch of bizarre stories.
I heard that the head general of the air cavalry used to deer hunt twice a week along the Cambodian border from the helicopter. And he got killed, and that's how he was killed. The thing got crashed into a tree.
Kilgore's obsession with surfing fits with these real stories, but more on that in a bit. Kilgore struts through the scene, with his cavalry hat and boots with spurs tossing death cards on the bodies of the deceased. This was meant to demoralize the enemy. We'll talk about this more in the next episode on the Valkyrie sequence. According to Duvall, the only inaccuracy was that every officer in the air cav should have had the cavalry hat and spurs, which was a tradition going all the way back to the 7th Cavalry Regiment in 1866. The death cards have the same death from above motto written on them. I actually got to see a few of the cards they used in this scene at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens, New York. They also had some of the designs for what was painted on Kilgore's helicopter, which I'm assuming was done by Dean Tavares. And check out these notes on the designs as well, like pilot's name on left side only, nothing on right door. Not stencil, use white block letters. And Kilgore's name on both sides between step flaps. Not stencil, use white block letters. Seeing this little moment of Kilgore telling a somber soldier to
Cheer up, son.
I can't help but remember this scene in Patton, co-written by Coppola, where Patton slaps a shell-shocked soldier, calls him a coward, and sends him back to the front lines. This was a scandal, and Patton made a public apology.
Now I freely admit that my method was wrong, but I hope you can understand my motive.
The soldier is wounded and seems like he could be shell-shocked, or simply just zoned out amidst all the death and destruction around him. This counterpoint to the Patton scene gives us a glimpse into the, at times, bizarre code that Kilgore lives by. Famous photographers Nancy Moran and Mary Ellen Mark were on the set during the filming of this scene. They were taking photos of the production, and Coppola simply had them dress up as war photographers and included them among the various other elements of the setting. Moran was a photojournalist in Saigon in the 70s for the New York Times. I couldn't find a picture of what she looks like, but seeing as she took this picture of Duvall, this could very well be her in the scene. Several great photographers visited the set throughout the production, but perhaps none more famous than Mary Ellen Mark, who we'll talk about in the Kurtz episodes. I haven't been able to spot her in this scene, so if you do, leave a comment down below. We see Kilgore through John Milius' eyes, as a man of honor who takes great care in helping evacuate civilians and making sure they get medical care despite being the one who invaded their village. We even see his respect for a dying enemy, offering the man a drink from his canteen.
Any man brave enough to fight with his guts strapped on can drink from my canteen any day.
This scene is very much a John Milius sentiment. There's this sense of honor to John in war, that Colonel would give the suffering man water because of his courage. They say that in some way the character was based on certain air cav commanders. I even heard once the name of General Patton's son as a very colorful commander in Vietnam. Of course, General Patton wore ivory-handled pistols during his war term.
However, we get a bit of dark humor in that as Kilgore is about to give the dying man begging for water a sip from his canteen, he is informed that one of the soldiers accompanying Captain Willard is famous surfer Lance Johnson, causing him to immediately get up before the man gets a chance to drink.
What's your name, sailor?
Gunner's mate, 3rd class, L. Johnson, sir. Gunner's mate, 3rd class.
Lance Johnson, the surfer?
For this part, Coppola wrote in the margins of Milius' draft that after meeting Lance, quote, "Only now does the coldness, the mistrust, and sense of conspiracy subside."
Well, you cut out the surcraft, Lance. I'm Bill Kilgore. I'm a goofy foot. This guy with you? Yeah.
The idea of Kilgore being obsessed with surfing came from Milius in his earliest drafts of the screenplay. In an interview with Milius by Quentin Tarantino, Tarantino brought up the actor William Smith, who had acted in Milius' Conan movie, and how much he enjoyed Smith's work in biker movies. One of these movies was The Losers, where CIA-trained bikers are sent to the Cambodian jungle to rescue an American diplomat by using modified motorcycles.
The Losers.
In the interview, Milius said, "I love The Losers. Big inspiration for Apocalypse Now." And Tarantino replied, "Really? The Losers?" And Milius said, Yeah, bikers in Vietnam, surfers in Vietnam, same idea. The scene ends with the most surreal details, a cow being airlifted while mass is being conducted amidst the flames of war.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Complex scenes like this were made even more difficult by cinematographer Vittorio Storaro's need to have control over the development process of the film he shot. In episode 7, we learned that Storaro's contract stipulated that the film would be developed by the Technicolor lab in Rome, but this caused some issues. When they sent the film out each week, they had to wait at least 10 days to get it back and see what they had actually shot. This meant that with all that was going on in front of and behind the scenes, and all of the coordination and logistics involved in a sequence like this, they had to trust that everything went right and move on before confirming that there wasn't some big problem that went unnoticed. Storaro also had to wait 3 hours for a book call with the lab to communicate with Ernesto Novelli, the technician who had supervised the development of all of Storaro's film. Producer Gray Fredrickson begged Storaro to have the film developed in Los Angeles because there were flights every 2 days and they could get the film back much sooner. Storaro said that he would leave the production if they forced him to develop in LA, saying, "I don't feel comfortable sending rushes to a lab where they don't know me and I don't know them. So if there's something on the creative side we need to discuss, that's fine. But if it's just because the rushes arrive late, that does not make any difference to me." The producers and Coppola agreed to what Storaro needed.
Kilgore had a pretty good day for himself. They choppered in the T-bones and the beer and turned the LZ into a beach party.
Here we get another example of the US military bringing their home to the foreign land they're invading.
The more they tried to make it just like home, the more they made everybody miss it.
In the margins of the screenplay, Coppola notes that this is an LA war. What we're looking at could very well be a barbecue on the beach in Los Angeles. As you might expect, night shoots for Apocalypse Now were even more complex, but the main issue here was travel. The area had, quote, a curfew on private planes, so Coppola and his top associates had to leave before 6 p.m. each evening, otherwise clearance was denied. For night shots like this, or even shots during sunset, the main crew would have to camp somewhere in Baylor. Storaro said, "That wasn't too bad, because every evening we were there, we would go to the Italian house to have pasta." For the other crew members, they had to first take a DC-3 plane to a nearby airstrip, then a 40-minute Jeep ride to Baylor, then another 30-minute truck ride over bad roads to get to the location. One night, the Manila airport closed for curfew as Coppola was trying to fly out in his private plane, and the pilot said, "It's your plane, you fly it." Coppola lost it and stomped on his brand new, quote, state-of-the-art miniature Nagra NSN tape recorder, later saying, "I'm sorry, I killed my little Nagra." Willard shows Kilgore a way that he can be escorted to the Nung River, but Kilgore is apprehensive because the nearby village is dangerous and contains heavy ordnance. But when he hears that it's a great surfing spot with 6-foot waves, he immediately changes his demeanor.
Well, I mean, it's pretty hairy in there. It's Charlie's point.
Charlie, don't surf!
Coppola writes in all caps on Milius' script, "Carnage goes to war not for Willard's mission, but to surf." Can we add one simple absurd element? A bathing suit, a surfboard, a six-pack? In Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, they bring starched shirts to the jungle. In Apocalypse Now, it's surfboards. On the next episode, we'll take a look at one of the greatest and most complex sequences in movie history, the Valkyrie sequence. And don't forget to check out this episode's companion PDF. It's just $1 and it really helps the series. Or you can support me on Patreon at the $5 level and get access to all of the companion PDFs I've made for this series. Thanks for watching.